Hello and welcome to Matcha Mornings, part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network. I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith, and I'm excited to dive deep on topics around holistic health, the power of food, hormone health, how the practices of yoga can impact our health and well-being, and much more. So grab your cup of tea, settle in, and let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Matcha Mornings podcast. I am super excited that you're joining me for today's episode of the show. And this week on Matcha Mornings, I am joined by Steff Gallante. Steff is a wellness educator, a 200-hour registered yoga teacher, a certified Ayurveda yoga specialist, a mindfulness and meditation coach, as well as a Zumba instructor. She is doing a lot in the health and wellness community, which is absolutely amazing. And she received her Ayurveda Yoga Specialist certification from the Himalayan Institute by Kathryn Tempelton and has been a wellness coach for over 5 years. And she is very passionate about sharing her love for Ayurveda and using self-care and mindfulness practices to promote mental and emotional health. Steff and I are very much aligned in terms of our philosophies and beliefs on health and wellness, which is why I was super excited to dive in with her. And in this episode of the show, we talk about her health and wellness journey, how she was inspired to become a yoga and Ayurveda teacher, and then we dive into 6 Ayurveda practices for optimizing your health for the fall season. So we talk about a lot of goodness in terms of how you can really optimize how you feel for the current season that we're in. And so basically the 6 sort of practices she talks about, you could really apply that to any season. And then she just talks about some specifics according to the current, fall state as the weather cools off, as we spend more time inside, as we crave, those heavier stews and soups and pumpkin spice lattes and all that goodness. So I hope that you really enjoy this episode of the show. And without further ado, here is Steff. Welcome to the podcast today, Steff. I'm really excited to have you here with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to just dive in with you. I was telling you before we hit record, I just love Ayurveda. It's something that is just really near and dear to my heart that I've been learning so much more about over the last year. And I'm stoked to learn from you and all of your wealth of knowledge. But maybe before we get into all that goodness, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, and where this passion for Ayurveda came from?
Sure. So I am the owner of my company. It's called Steff Gallante Self-Care, and I offer services both in groups and one-on-one through yoga, mindfulness, meditation, and Ayurveda to support people on their journey for health and well-being. I never thought I would be here in this space where I am. It's funny, when you take a moment to just be, energetically and in your mind where you are and realize, wow, I'm not where I planned to be, but it's so cool that I ended up here. And I've always had an interest in health and wellness. I was always active as a kid. I grew up as an athlete. But this interest, particularly in yoga, self-care, and mindfulness, really came later on through my adulthood. As I went through my adolescence, growing up in a predominantly white area in the 90s, I ended up undergoing or experiencing a lot of racism, unfortunately. And that caused me to really struggle with my self-confidence, with my self-worth. And unfortunately, I continued to have experiences with racism and discrimination, even as I went into my early 20s and into my 30s. And then I knew that was an issue, but I didn't realize how much until probably about 10 years ago. And the invitation that yoga brings to you to just be as perfect as you are. And it's so crazy to think about that. Like, I'm perfect, even though I'm imperfect. Perfect, even though there are things I wish I could change or things that people tell me that are not good enough. That blew my mind. That was the first place where I felt safe and accepted, and that I was not less than. And when it came to Ayurveda, I found this as I went through my yoga teacher training and was offered the opportunity to do the Ayurveda Yoga Specialist training. I didn't really have a lot of Ayurveda training in my 200-hour yoga teacher training. So I knew of it, but I didn't know really a lot about it. And it wasn't until I went to my first training session for the Ayurveda Yoga Specialist course that I was like, oh my gosh, the stars have aligned, the universe, God, Jesus, the angels, whoever it is that you believe is out there in the universe, right, with their puppet strings, I was brought to where I was meant to be, where I was meant to be. I really was. And so much of the information of Ayurveda in terms of living within nature and the self-love aspect really connected so deeply to me that I was able to heal a lot of health issues that had developed because of the emotional issues that I had for so many years. And I had gone through tough pregnancies and I was working full time and I was doing all the things as an adult, but I was suffering and I wasn't healthy and I wasn't at my best. And Ayurveda really gave me my life back. It saved me, that mindfulness and yoga, this way of connecting deeply to yourself, of loving yourself, of honoring yourself. And so I left my full-time job right before the pandemic, August 2019, to save my mental health and my sanity because I was struggling. I was really struggling in all facets of my life. And I started my business thinking there's got to be other people who need this help, who need to prioritize their self-care and their well-being, to really learn what self-care and self-love looks like and how impactful that is for their daily well-being, but also their success and the way they serve others. So that's kind of how I got here, through my own trials and tribulations and my own experience of success and healing, really, through these modalities.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. That's a really just beautiful story to hear. And I can relate so much to it. And I also felt like when I discovered Ayurveda, it was kind of like this light bulb aha moment. Like, this thing makes so much sense, like living in tune with nature and eating locally and with the seasons. And I think so many of us feel that intuitively, but just don't really know that there's actually, the Sanskrit word for it. But before we dive into that more, I'd actually love to hear, how your business has been going, because obviously, in August 2019, nobody had any idea of like what's coming. What is it? 6, 7, 8 months, whatever it was later.
Right.
How are you feeling kind of as the pandemic happened and you're like, I'm like a baby business owner here?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question. You're absolutely right. When I left my job in August 2019, I did it, like I said, to really focus on me so that I could be at my best for me, but also for my kids and my husband and my family, and then all those that I serve and the energy I put out into the world. And, as I started to listen to that voice inside my head that said, you really need to use your gifts and your training to help people. You can do more with this. I decided in October 2019 to start my business. And like you said, who knew what was to come? So I had my website done. I, made plans for what my services would be. And luckily, I had planned to be virtual because I had a lot of friends and family, past clients who had moved beyond the New Jersey area that I thought, it'd be pretty cool if I could reach them. And I didn't mind traveling, to do workshops or events and things like that. And I got the business off the ground. And then there we were in March. And I was lucky to have had virtual teaching experience. So I had already been teaching yoga and meditation online. But it's funny, I think I personally was impacted more by the pandemic than I feel like my business was. My business was, right? Everybody's business was, even virtual businesses. There were a lot of hardships and there was a lot of navigating things you had never done before and challenges that the pandemic itself brought up. But I think for me personally, the challenge was immense because I found myself home with my 2 young boys. They're now 5 and 7. And my husband's a teacher, so he was teaching from home. And it's funny because one of the reasons I left my job was because I felt like I needed more time with my family, that I needed to be more present. And then, when you ask the universe for something and then you get it, but it's not quite what you asked for. And then you're like, but that's not what I was planning on.
Yeah, for sure.
I wasn't really expecting quarantine in a pandemic and, 24 hours a day home together. So that was a lot. And I have to say, I really struggled, and I'm feeling the effects of that struggle of simultaneously momming and building this business that I never intended to do during a pandemic. And so I felt that a lot of clarity came with my business and my offerings and the way I could serve people, because I thought, well, gosh, I'm not the only one going through this. Other people are too. Right. And so how can I really make these offerings timely? How can I really serve people, down to the very basic premise of showing up for yourself during an incredibly stressful time that we don't know ever is when it's going to end, right? Like you're running a marathon that doesn't have a end, like finish line. How do you navigate that?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I can relate to so much of what you said. And I mean, it's so great that your business was set up virtually and that you didn't have to juggle switching that. But yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I've worked remotely for, I guess, like 6 years now. And I had so many friends at the beginning of the pandemic be like, you've done this for like 5 years at this point. Like, this sucks. And I'm like, it's a little bit different when I get to like travel anywhere in the world and I get to socialize and I get to, go to the gym and go for dinner. Like, working from home in a lockdown is very different from working from home in like normal life. So I feel like that's, kind of how I feel, similar to you talking about like, I asked for all this time with my family and then it was granted to me, but not really in the way I was looking for it to be. But it makes me think about how, I mean, even, dealing with and coping with the last like year and a half of all the events that have happened in the world. I mean, Ayurveda and yoga are really like beautiful teachers for helping us kind of like prepare for these types of things. Did you feel like your practices have kind of were able to help you in some way with the coping and adjusting and transitioning?
I totally feel that. And I completely agree. Something that I would always talk with my friends in the field, in the health and wellness field, particularly yoga, mindfulness, Ayurveda, is how fortunate I felt to have this knowledge, to have a practice, my own practice, not my business, but my practice of breathing, of meditating, these practices of self-care that I developed through the Ayurveda teaching, a regular yoga practice. I felt so blessed and humbled by those practices because I could turn to them whenever I needed. And as we know, as a practitioner, the reason we practice these things when we're calm is so that they come to us and are available to us when we need them in heightened states of stress. I think that my mental and emotional wear and tear would have been much worse had it not been for these practices. 100%. I credit the fact that my marriage is intact and I am, still, being able to show up as a mom and all the other ways that I show up in the world. I credit it all to these practices, to the faith in them and the faith in myself that I can show up as I am and do the best that I can with the practices that I know support me and my well-being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I completely agree with that. And I definitely felt the same way. And I think that a lot of yoga teachers and yogis and, people who practice Ayurveda can probably relate to that. And I think that here is probably a good transition into talking a bit more about Ayurveda. Can you share a little bit just to start before we get into like the best practices for optimizing our health for the seasons? Just a little bit about like what Ayurveda is as a whole and kind of how, how we can use it in our lives?
Sure, sure. So Ayurveda is a spiritual science of longevity. And so the intention is to heal the body and have it function as it's at its best for your entire life, not just for now, not just to heal a certain ailment that you might have, but it's for good well-being throughout each and every day, throughout challenging times, and overall for the span of your life. And Ayurveda really focuses on self-care practices that are in tune with your needs, that are in tune with nature, and to kind of guide how you take care of yourself, not just today, but with the intention of living well tomorrow. And also with making sure that your energy is good and balanced so that you can do all the things that you love. It's really based in, using nature as our guide. And it is a wonderful sister science to yoga. So yoga heals the mind while Ayurveda heals the body. They work synergistically together. And what's really cool, I think, is that Ayurveda is a wonderful complement to Western medicine. It doesn't have to be either or, but Ayurveda practices really work nicely with anyone who has to adopt a certain routine or practice in terms of Western medicine for their well-being as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that you brought that up because I think sometimes we think about Western and Eastern medicine as sort of this like dichotomy that they like can't work together. And I completely agree with you in that obviously Western medicine has a lot of beautiful purposes. It's saved, so many lives over time and continues to do so. Yet these ancient practices like Ayurveda, they come from like the spiritual wisdom, and people really understood the body in these like deep, really in tune ways. And I think there's so much that we can gather from that. That's like, okay, there's something going on. Can we take our medicine, but also look at the root cause of it and maybe see if we can heal in like a deep way? And then maybe we don't need the medicine in the future. So I think that,
That's right.
Yeah, I love that.
I think what's pretty cool also about Ayurveda is that it requires you as the practitioner or the teacher, both parties, to view the body and the mind holistically, right? So if let's just say you're dealing with a digestive issue, when you're doing something with Ayurveda or you're looking at your issue through an Ayurvedic lens, it's not just looking at that issue, right? It's looking at the entire body and the person's practices. It's looking at their entire lifestyle as a way to gain information about the issue at hand, as well as to guide what the healing protocol is going to be for the entire life practices, not just to heal that one particular issue.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's something I've always really loved about Ayurveda is looking very holistically and very like at the whole body, the whole mind, like everything that's going on. Cause sometimes I think that and I've certainly been guilty of this. It's like, oh, my stomach's upset, which means it's like entirely confined to my stomach and maybe something I've like put in my mouth earlier that day, something that I've eaten. And so I feel like the thing that it's like, you think about, okay, I ate something earlier today, my stomach hurts. But for me, as somebody who has had digestive issues, it often is like, maybe I've eaten something, but I'm also maybe like really stressed because I have a big meeting the next day, or, I have to get something to my boss, or, I haven't slept right. There's so many other things that can cause this indigestion that I'm experiencing that's not entirely just related to like the food that I've eaten. And sure, the food can be a culprit, but looking kind of at like this bigger picture of what's going on as a whole in terms of like my mind, my body, where are my hormones at? What part of my menstrual cycle am I at? Et cetera, et cetera.
That's right. I totally agree. And I think that was the most profound piece, or the most profound like aha that I had as I learned more about this, because when I started the Ayurveda yoga specialist training, I was in a place where I was having digestive issues, which I had in and out and of life. And now I realize that's more of a vata imbalance, which is one of my more dominant doshas, right? That's the element of that wind and that air within you. But um, it was, again, like you just said, like not just dealing with the, okay, well, what am I eating or not eating, right? But diving into stress, right? The idea that the brain and the gut are connected and understanding how my lifestyle was playing into these digestive issues and my thought processes were playing into the digestive issues. It just was so eye-opening that things aren't always what they seem, really.
Yeah, absolutely. There can be so many other factors to it. And another thing that I love about Ayurveda is how much it is looking like getting in sync with nature. And so nature means very much like, the seasons, depending on where you live, your seasons might look quite differently. You're in New Jersey. I'm originally from Canada. We get like four pretty distinct seasons a year. I think
Right.
New Jersey's the same way. So you
Yeah.
really feel those shifts in terms of like, craving different foods, craving different activities, wearing different clothing, feeling the temperatures so differently. And it's interesting because living in Mexico now, they do have seasons, but I feel it at like kind of a different sort of level. Like I don't feel it as intensely as I did living in Canada. And
Mm.
so I'd love to dive into that a little bit, like talking about, being in tune with nature and syncing with the seasons and that type of thing.
Yeah. And so one of the main principles of Ayurveda is just as you said, living and syncing with nature. And, whether you live in an area where I live in New Jersey, which really experiences the four seasons, or you live in a place where the climate is kind of the same or similar, not too drastically different, all year round. But there are some subtle shifts even in those types of places. And so, what living in tune with nature means is honoring the cycles of the season. And so, changing your habits and your practices based on what's happening outside your door. It also, and the reason that that's important is because nature is made up of the elements, right? And that's a big foundation of Ayurveda is the elements. And so, the idea is the five elements: air, ether, fire, water, and earth are present in and around all of us. And they're are in us, they're in everything and all matter. And you can imagine that the elements are going to change the balance of the elements. What is predominant in different seasons will change. And so it's calling us, Ayurveda calls us to shift our practices, to add a little balance or bring into balance with what's happening outside of our door rather than bringing things or allowing there to be too much of what's happening outside. So, for instance, if it's fall, fall typical characteristics are cool, dry, maybe windy, unpredictable. And so, what it'll call us to do then, Ayurveda, in the fall is to balance that energy of that type of elemental nature with more grounding practices, with warmth, with moisture, with stability. And so, the idea is balancing with the opposite element or the opposite feel. So that way you create a harmony and a homeostasis. Another piece of living in tune with nature is in terms of the cycle of the day. So that could be rising with the sun, sleeping when, the moon has risen. And so intentionally choosing the actions, kind of like how the day goes through its own cycle and aligning with that to, again, create that harmony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the things that I love about Ayurveda as well is this idea that like different times of the day we have different energy levels and everyone's kind of different depending on, their their constitution, which maybe we can talk about what that means. It's like their makeup, their nature. And I feel like that was something that really like made sense to me, like being like, oh, I don't like getting up early in the morning because I've got, these like kapha sleep patterns and tendencies and stuff like that. And, sometimes I like to take afternoon naps. It's like, okay, this makes like so much sense to me when somebody writes it out this way.
Yeah. So with Ayurveda, there are three energetic components or governing bodies, if you will, that are comprised of two of the elements. So Vata is made up of the air and ether, ether being the space, right? And then you have, and so then that Vata dosha or that constitution is present in the fall season, as well as within us and our tendency towards being hyperactive, right? Always being on the go or easily tired. Anxiousness, comes from an excessive characteristic and quality of Vata, digestive issues as well. But also our ability to be flexible is a nice Vata quality as well. Versus Pitta dosha or the constitution of Pitta, which is fire and water. And, the characteristics of that being, fiery and warm and also spreading. So people who are competitive or type A personality are more pittic. And Pitta comes to us in the typical summer season, right? So the hot that I'm experiencing, in the summertime here in New Jersey, 80 and 90 degrees, that could be a lot. And, same thing as I was saying in the fall, bringing in warm and grounding. In the summertime, especially in an area where you're feeling the heat, that would be a great time to bring in more cooling practices and making sure that you're not overheating and that your food choices follow that same pattern. Then you have the kapha dosha, which you were talking a little bit about, which is the earth element. And that is going to be more of your grounding, your loyal aspect. It's also has a little bit of moisture because it does have a little bit of water attached to it. And so that comes out in the typical winter and some parts of the spring as well. And so it's very interesting that with each of these doshas are expressed in all of us, just in different quantities and different ways as well. And so every person has one or two dominant doshas, and the third one is there just kind of taking a back seat to the other two rock stars. And so for me, my two dominant doshas are Pitta and Vata. So I'm a Pitta Vata mix, and Kapha is a little less. But, even just from the qualities that I just mentioned, you could almost see, oh, wow. So that's where that energy comes from. Oh, that's where. And what I love about this too, with the doshas and understanding the energy and the elements and the qualities of them, is that you realize, wow, I'm really an individual. What I teach to my college students or my clients is that your makeup is yours. Even if someone else has the same two dominant doshas, the way they're expressed, their qualities and characteristics that are expressed in you are completely different. They could be physical versus yours are mental or emotional. It's so interesting because all of these energies govern the systems and physiology of our body, whether that's digestion, whether it's our heart function, whether it's the way that our brain works. Our physiology is governed by these energies within us. And so the way we choose to practice our life and the ways we choose to act can either heighten those qualities to where they become imbalanced, like too dominant, and that's what causes sickness and just that feeling of being unwell or dis-ease, not to be confused with disease, versus bringing in the opposite qualities to balance out and making sure you create that harmony. And so it's so interesting going back to the individual nature. a lot of people grow up being compared to others, and why can't you be more like this? Or I wish I was like that, or like this. I wish I could do this and not be this way so much. Like maybe, you worry too much, or maybe you get fired up too easily. What's nice is that Ayurveda shows us there's a reason for the way you are. And it also gives you answers and ways to balance it if you're like, oh, I really could use some help in this. I love that. It gave me like a sense of myself where I was created this way. It's okay. But then if I ever did want to help myself a little bit, I could, and I would know how.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I completely agree with it. Like, I think that sometimes we think about like categorizing ourselves as being really confining, but I actually feel like sometimes getting these like answers in the forms of these like quote unquote categories can actually be really freeing, because we'll see like somebody doing something else. Like, for example, like I'll see, somebody who's like very pitta, like out there, climbing mountains and going on runs. And I'm like, oh, I should really run. And it's really nice to just be like, I don't really like running. Like I like lower key activities. Like I like yoga. I like taking walks. I love going to the gym and like lifting weights and stuff like that. It's not like I'm just a couch potato, but it's like going and running up a mountain and then running up another mountain, like just doesn't fuel my fire the way it does for somebody else. And I feel like it's quite freeing to kind of recognize like, okay, there's actually like a difference between the way we are in our nature that makes us kind of crave these different activities and crave these different foods and, kind of crave just a different day-to-day lifestyle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It really is just such a beautiful lesson of the self and how to appreciate yourself. It's so cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Hey everyone, we're just taking a quick break from the show to talk about energy bits. Energy bits are spirulina tablets made of one ingredient, algae. Nothing added, nothing subtracted, just 100% plant-based algae nutrition. No sugar, no caffeine, no gluten, no soy, no additives, no GMOs, no preservatives, no binders, nothing artificial. Just 100% algae, 100% green, 100% healthy, and 100% pure. Pure and simple, the way food should be. They have high protein, high beta carotene, high iron, high chlorophyll, high antioxidants, and over 40 plus vitamins, including the B vitamins. They have electrolytes, including magnesium, potassium, and are a great source of essential fatty acids. Honestly, I could go on and on and on about how great Energy Bits are for you, and that's why I've decided to partner with them. If you want to learn more about Energy Bits or order some yourself, you can head on over to energybits.com to learn more. Use the code WANDERBARN to get 20% off your order. Once again, that's energybits.com and use the code WANDERBARN for 20% off your order. All right, back to the episode. All right, so we've talked about living in tune with nature, which is our first practice. So for anyone who needs to kind of just allow themselves to be as they are, you've got that permission. Number 2 is eating a colorful and flavorful diet. Can we dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. And so, one of the best practices that you can do is eat what is in season outside your door. And of course, that's going to change geographically. But leaning towards whatever is at the farmer's market, right? The local produce in the grocery store is the best bet, because the earth, the soil changes season to season, and Mother Nature produces for us exactly what we are meant to eat to allow our bodies to be as healthy as possible. So that's number 1, eating a colorful, flavorful diet. So in the fall, you might be leaning towards more mushy type foods, warming foods, some of the warming spices like cinnamon and nutmeg and things like that to
pumpkin spice lattes.
Yes, yes, you see.
I mean, Starbucks is like Ayurvedic minus all the sugar.
Yes, exactly. I was just going to say, I read somewhere that Starbucks has it right, with the pumpkin spice lattes, or then the peppermint in the winter and things like that. Absolutely. So if you're not sure, everyone, you could take your advice or your lead from the coffee companies. But, it's really ensuring that you are, again, aligning your digestive health with with the food that you're eating or the food that's outside of our door. And so in the wintertime, that's why those stews are so nice. The heavier, comforting foods are what we turn to, versus in the spring, we start to shift towards lighter foods, because it starts to think, the world starts to lighten up and the temperatures start to warm up. And so you may not want those heavy meals anymore. In the summertime, again, still those lighter meals, maybe like whiter fish and, lots of greens and, wonderful fruits and things that are available just in the summertime. You get that snapshot of like 2 months where you get some of the most beautiful tasting, wonderful, delicious fruits that you could ever want. And so that is a big thing, seasonal foods. Another big thing is the way that you spice your meals. And the reason spices, and when we say spice in Ayurveda, we don't mean hot as in like, we often think of spicy, right? Spicy as in like hot, heat hot, like chili, things like that. But to be spiced means you're using herbs and spices that could be hot as in like, tasting, tongue burning hot, or it could just be, it gives it taste and flavor. And the reason that these are important is because it helps the absorption of the food and allows for digestion to happen nicely, as well as, and what people don't realize, one of the biggest take homes for me when it came to eating colorful, flavorful, seasonal foods was what the spices do for your nervous system. Because at the end of the day, when we treat ourselves well, the intention is to allow the nervous system, which houses our system for being healthy, allowing that to be at ease. So the same way as we breathe and we meditate, shavasana at the end of yoga to calm the body down, spices do the same thing, which is incredible. It calms the nervous system, soothes the nervous system. So spices are very important to be included within your eating regimen as well.
Yeah, this was something that I wasn't aware of like previous to learning about Ayurveda. I always just thought like, obviously I salt and pepper my food and I put like various spices on that recipes call for and stuff, but it just never, like, I never thought about it as like spices as medicine, I guess, and spices as, healing and having these like really important properties. And I feel like that was actually one of the things that surprised me the most about Ayurveda.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, when you learn how impactful these simple practices, paying attention to what you eat and the type of food or the way you spice it, and that it can affect your physiology and the way that your body runs and all of the processes and the way everything syncs up together, that you can affect your body just by simply paying attention to what we put in our mouths. Because, especially in the fitness industry, oftentimes the conversation around food is about weight management, right? Mm-hmm. Weight loss, weight gain, whatever your goal is. It's not always about healing your body and keeping it healthy in that respect. And so Ayurveda, coming from a lens of food as medicine, it's incredible. That was just so eye-opening for me.
100%. And I feel like in the fitness industry, there's a lot of talk on like macros and, protein and carbs and fats, which of course, understanding that is important. But sure. I feel like so often it'll end up being like, well, just have like a protein shake in the morning. And I feel like Ayurveda is so much more about like whole foods, like foods that come from the earth. Like you have mentioned, foods that are in season, and then using these like spices to really bring out the different qualities of the food and have them, digest a certain way in your body, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely.
And so on that note, digestion is obviously super important. I know that's something, we mentioned earlier. And I feel like this is something that as I talk to people, it's like pretty much everyone is like at some point in their life, they've struggled with digestion, and digestion is huge because that's really, you can be eating, all the salads and all the greens and all the green juices, but if your body's not actually digesting it and absorbing it, it's not getting those nutrients. So digestion is huge. Let's dive into that.
Yeah, for sure. And what's very interesting is that when we think about digestion, like if you or I were just to say the word digestion, to whoever it is that is our audience, automatically, I would say probably 90%, the majority of people would automatically think digestion of food, right? And, the process that happens within the body to break down your food and eliminate it, right? But what is very interesting when it comes to Ayurveda is that the term digestion does not only pertain to food or what we drink, but it's also the digestion of experiences, traumas, and emotions. It's the digestion of our thoughts and our feelings. So it's, again, going back to that holistic outlook. It's so much more than just the food or the drinks that we ingest, but the everything that we take in on the entire day's basis and over time. Because just like what we eat and what we drink, parts of it get stored within us, our emotions do too. Our experiences do as well. And they need to be digested. So another principle of Ayurveda is strengthening your digestive power. When it comes to meals, that's meal timing. So ideally eating somewhere between 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning. Hopefully you've risen with the sun. That's part of living in tune with nature. So you're eating your breakfast anywhere between 7 and 8 o'clock. And the reason that this outline happens is so that from one meal to the next, you're giving yourself the window of digestion to happen before you then sit down for the next meal. So maybe you have a snack if you need it between 9 and 10, and then you can go ahead and have your lunch between 12 and 1 p.m. Then again, maybe a snack if you needed it between 2 and 3, and then dinner's happening somewhere between 5:30 and 7, maybe 7:30 at the latest. And, again, going back to the fitness industry, a lot of times people are having the argument of why we shouldn't eat after 7 o'clock, that it causes weight gain, et cetera. And all that may be true. But from an Ayurvedic prospect or point of view, the reason that it's important to not eat anything after 7 p.m. is because you want to lay the framework for your sleep. And so you want to give your body the opportunity to digest the food that you've eaten from the time you eat it around 7 or before 7 until you go to bed at 10 o'clock, anywhere between 10 and 11 at night. Because then when you're sleeping, the body is then regenerating. It goes through a series of processes that it can only go through while you sleep. Those processes are stunted a little bit if the body is also going through digestion because you've eaten later on at night. So the body is going to then digest, and that system or that process will overtake what the body is supposed to be doing during sleep, which is why oftentimes you wake up feeling foggy, like you're bringing some of the stuff from yesterday into today because it's not digested, whether that's food or emotions. And so it's very important to be sure that you kind of go through that cycle of eating with that timeline to honor the processes that need to happen at night and then the next day. And another big piece of Ayurveda in terms of digestive power is ensuring that lunch is your biggest meal of the day. And a lot of times here in the West, especially in American culture, not sure about Canada, you could tell me, oftentimes dinner would be the biggest meal of the day, not lunch. And so that's quite a shift for people, because oftentimes if you're at work, think about it, if you're at work, you're in between things, or whether you work from home or whatever your schedule is, oftentimes we're running through lunch. Some people skip lunch altogether and then it's dinner, they sit down and it's this big meal. But again, that's a big ask for the body to digest before getting to bed and going through its healing and rejuvenating process.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, Canada is very much the same way where it's like, because so many people work in offices and obviously things are quite different right now with the pandemic and stuff. But in general, people will be working in offices. They have like maybe an hour to eat. So lunch is not going to be like a big to do. It's going to be like a pretty quick grab a sandwich or, a salad or a soup or something like that. And then dinner is like the heaviest meal of the day. And it's so interesting. One of the things that I struggle with a little bit about living in Mexico for a good chunk of the year is that they eat dinner traditionally so late. Like eating at like 6 p.m. is like, what are you doing? Like you're clearly not from here if you're eating at 6 p.m. And my husband and I are like, we're totally fine with that because I actually like notice a significant difference in the quality of my sleep and how I wake up the next day if I eat really late, but a lot of people will eat like 8:30, 9, even 10 p.m. and then turn around and go to bed at like midnight. And I'm just like, oh, that just makes me like the thought of it makes me feel gross.
Yeah, it's very interesting too, when you talk about Ayurveda principles and then culture comes into play and, geography and, the practices of certain countries and cultures, it's very interesting and that's where then the conversation is, well, you do what's best for you, or, when you know better, you do better type of thing. And so good on you for, saying, this is what works best for me. Cause I agree with you, and sometimes where, you go to an event or something like that and you eat late, but then you're like, oh, okay, this is why I adhere to that schedule.
No, for sure. Yeah. With some of my friends, it's like we have to compromise. It'll be like dinner at 8:30. I'm like 7. It's like
Yeah.
8, like 7:30. It's like 7:45. Okay, fine. We can do that.
Yes. Yes. And you know what? That's such a good thing to talk about too. That, when I talk about Ayurveda, I don't know if this happens to you. And when I'm dealing with one-on-one clients, oftentimes they hear me say, you have to do this and the strict schedule and all of this. And yes, for sure. But what you said earlier was, sometimes that understanding of the foundation or the principles, it gives you the stability of the knowledge and the practices that will help you. But it also then, once you get the practices to be a little bit more habitual for you, it opens up a flexibility that you didn't have before, where it's grounded in reason and grounded in your own wellness. But then you can stray a little bit and not feel like you've quote unquote fallen off the wagon, or it won't cause a downward spiral. So you can, because some people will say to me, Steph, does that mean that I can't go out with friends, late at night and eat or do this? And I'm like, no, that doesn't mean it. Ayurveda has this beautiful thing called an 80-20 rule. And that is 80% of the time you do what you know you should do for your body and for your well-being. And again, it's not a strict, I can't. It's rather saying, this is what I'm going to do. This is a conscious decision I'm going to make for my health and well-being. That shifts everything, where you're not missing out. You're not taking away. It's not, oh, I can't do this anymore. No, it's I'm choosing to do this instead. And when you do that and you stick with it, you create that stability, there comes a flexibility with this, where then you can open yourself to these other things. And, you won't have too bad of an experience if you eat too late, or you miss your meal time by a couple of, a half hour or whatever it is, whatever it is that you choose to do, however it is that you choose to then the other 20%, go away from the, straight and narrow, it's okay. Your body will be all right.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And I think that is something that's important to remember, because I think sometimes we can get caught up in like trying to be really strict and really regimented with things. And I feel like one of the best things that has helped me is like loosening up a little bit, like, definitely tuning into my body and what my body's asking. But, if a friend wants to eat a little later, and it's the difference between me like saying yes or no to the dinner, like it's okay as long as it's not happening, every night.
That's right. That's right. I agree.
Awesome. And so our fourth tip is exercise. I know we talked a little bit about exercise already in terms of, our nature and our constitution, but let's talk a little bit more about how we can optimize this for our health.
Yes. So exercise is huge. It does so much for our body and our mind and our energy. And so the ideal times to exercise in terms of the Ayurvedic clock, the system of the day, is from 6 to 10 a.m. or even 6 to 10 p.m. I would say a little on the earlier side. And so that's important because you want to move your body, and that allows the body's systems to be strong, but also to allow your mind to release. And different modalities are important too. Yoga can be an active yoga practice. It could be a gentle yoga practice, walking, running, biking. I mean, whatever it is that you like to do for exercise, go do it. What Ayurveda teaches us is that, again, with this season, we can make some adjustments. So if we're talking about the fall season, that's a time when, because of that airy, windy, ungrounded feeling of the fall, that's when we will bring in some more grounding practices. So upping your strength training game, maybe less vigorous, like HIIT training, plyometric cardio for more endurance type of movement. Um, it might also be longer bouts of stretching, or maybe restorative yoga or gentle yoga. Maybe you're doing your stretches on the ground to feel the ground beneath you versus standing up. Maybe it's also allowing yourself to have more time to do some grounding exercise and elongating that in the fall. In the winter time, it's still grounding, but also maybe you're allowing yourself to comfort yourself a little bit more. Maybe it's a little bit more uplifting because of the darkness of the winter. And so winter is a funny time, just like you might have seasonal affective disorder. So some people who are dealing with like depressive qualities, they may need more of an uplifting, versus other people, if anxiety comes up more in the winter time, they may need more grounding. So it's really listening to you. What is your nature? What happens to you in the winter time? Adjusting your exercise based on how you're feeling that day or what your tendency is for that season. In the springtime, we might go towards, again, grounding if you're feeling a little unnerved, but maybe that's a time for more vigorous exercise if you're feeling still that down grounded quality of the winter too much. Maybe then that's when you start to take your cardio up a little bit more, have a little bit more fun, do all the jumping and the herky jerky type of movements, go for it. And then in the summertime, you can do all the things. Recreational activity is wonderful in the summer. So going along with that flourishing, that self-love of the summertime, but then also still building in pauses and grounding principles to honor the length of the day and how we have a tendency to go, go, go during the summer. And then in the summertime, especially if you're living in hot climates, really making sure you're exercising at the cooler parts of the day is going to be important to not let that heat of pitta really get out of whack.
Yeah, for sure. It's amazing. There's like so much good stuff to think about when it comes to our exercise. And I feel like too, as a woman, then considering like your monthly cycle is so important also, and your energy levels, but definitely makes sense. Like I feel like I used to, especially when I worked corporate, I would end, 4:30 and then go to the gym, and I would have had, probably my second dose of coffee of the day to kind of like get out of that afternoon slump, and then force myself to exercise before I went home. Because if I sat down on the couch at like 4:35, I probably wasn't getting up again. But
that's right. The morning is a great time to exercise, because it allows you to fuel your body the way it needs to be fueled, and it sets the precedence for the day. And so whether it's the fall and you need a little bit more grounding, that's a great time to do a grounding practice. Even meditation and breathing is wonderful in the morning. But even in the winter, getting out of bed rather than, in the winter, maybe, especially if you live in somewhere cold or dark, you want to stay in bed for as long as possible, but giving yourself a reason to get up out of bed and start the day, to get it started, with the sun, and using those qualities of awake and alert to start your morning with is very important. So a morning workout is wonderful any time of the season, but just adjusting the intensity of the workout based on the season or the modality, the method that you choose is going to be important.
For sure. I love that. And then our next thing is sleep, which is so important. I feel like I've learned so much about sleep in the last year. And obviously I knew sleep was important. We need it as humans, but just like the importance of a quality sleep and how much it impacts our health and wellness is huge.
Huge, huge. And so many of our issues of lack of focus, lack of concentration, anger issues, while some of the issues that we face during the day may be tied to other traumas and other experiences, but they're exacerbated, of course, by terrible sleep, right? If ever you have been deprived of sleep, what kind of cruel form of torture that is. And, as I was saying before, with the processes that happen while we sleep, they're integral to the health and well-being and the functioning of our body, but also our mind as well. The body goes through different levels of consciousness while we sleep. And it's important to be able to dive down low, into those, lower or slower brain waves. So that way the body and the mind can really rest. And the way, and a lot of people think with stuff like, how do I get better sleep? Like I try, but I have a hard time falling asleep, or I wake up in the middle of the night. I have a hard time getting back to sleep. And a big piece of the quality of our sleep comes in our ability to manage stress and power down from the day far enough in advance to set ourselves up for good sleep. It's a big ask of us to have the body go right to sleep if we're closing our computer, getting off our phone or turning the TV off, a minute before we expect to be sleeping, and especially way late at night.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like this is definitely something that I've changed up in my own like habits and rituals over the last couple of years, like going from, watching TV as a wind down to getting right into bed to really trying to make sure I'm not on devices after like, 7, 8 p.m., trying to just be very like quiet and restful in the evenings. And I mean, I'm a human being. I scroll on Instagram and, sometimes distract myself with my phone or Netflix. But I really noticed the difference between like how fast I fall asleep, staying asleep, the quality of my sleep, and how I wake up the next day, depending on what I've done the night before. And, there's some times where I have to work late or get something done in the evenings. And if it requires me to be on my computer with blue lights, it doesn't matter like if I have blue blockers and, the setting on my computer that takes the blue light away, like it still impacts my sleep because my brain's going so late.
Absolutely. If you think about it, this is a kind of a silly comparison, but imagine if you drive your car and then you put it in park, the engine stays, you hear it. It's not like running, but it's still doing something, and it takes time to power down before the hood of your car is cool to the touch. The body is the same way, and so is the brain. It doesn't, just because you power it down, it's not like your phone where you press the off button and it powers down and that's it, right? The body takes time. It needs its powering down process, which Ayurveda recommends. It's that powering down process is happening from 7 o'clock. Like you eat your dinner and then it's that powering down. Now, does that mean that you have to shut everything off and, stop your contact with the world? No. But like you're saying, being more mindful about the things you choose to do at the end of the night. And, as you said too, like life gets in the way and people have obligations that they have to do. Right. And so my advice to people is to really notice, what do I have to do? What can I not say no to? Right. And so of course there are going to be those things, but then not jam packing as much as possible, in those 2-3 hours before you go to bed. So that if you do have an obligation, then you're present at that obligation, but then you're taking intentional time to power down in other ways, or, taking time to prepare for the next day, setting out your clothes or packing your lunch for the next day, prepping your breakfast, intentional ways to set up the next day nicely. But also, again, it's not connected to work. It's not connected to problem solving necessarily. It's nothing very stressful in terms of, vigorous brain work. Now, prepping meals can be vigorous brain work. I agree, of course. But, it's not like, you're doing work and you're producing, you're in production mode. It's very different. And if you have the ability to then do a hobby or do something that brings you joy, or breathing, meditation, self-massage, a foot massage, all of those are wonderful ways to love on yourself and set yourself up for some really good rest.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's really interesting because I feel like there's been kind of this big, I guess, like movement around the importance of morning routines. Like I think more people than not kind of understand that a morning routine can really set your day up for success, which I'm a huge fan of morning routines. Like I live and breathe by my morning routine. But I think one thing we're not talking about as much is this idea of like evening routines or evening rituals and having some sort of like an actual shutdown. And I feel like this is super important especially if you're somebody who's transitioned to working from home and is continuing to work from home, is to
Mhm.
have some sort of a ritual where, you shut yourself down from work and you kind of transition into, family time or partner time or, cooking, and then the things you do after you eat. Like, how do you actually spend your evening before you go to bed?
Yes, it's so important. It really is. And we do this, but not for ourselves. Think about it, for people who have um, pets. Your dog knows the ritual. You go out for the last walk of the night at X time, right? It's clockwork. And then you have your play and your little snuggle time, and then the dog goes to bed. Same thing with kids. Oftentimes we have a ritual for our kids. So if we do that for our pets and we do it for our kids, we also need to do it for ourselves. Now, of course, people make the argument, but Steph, because I'm doing it all those things for the pets and for the kids, then there are other things I need to clean the house and do other things. Yes, yes, yes. Of course you do. Of course. But it's also being intentional about building in little by little these little things, maybe ending your night a little earlier by 5 or 10 minutes at the start, just for some quiet time. And over time, making that end time earlier and earlier. So not just saying, okay, from starting tomorrow, I'm not doing anything past 7, but gradually you then create time for yourself to do this.
Yes, absolutely. I really, really love that. And so the last thing on our best practices list is taking it easy, which I love. I'm a big fan of like shifting from this like over productivity culture, this like hustle culture that I think people have gotten really attached to over the last couple of years, or maybe more than that, even. Let's talk about why taking it easy is important and how we can do that.
Yeah. I mean, when you go on vacation, right, and you really step away, how do you feel? That almost people almost can't even put into words how they feel, because it's almost indescribable, because it's so the opposite of their regular life, right? You feel calm and clear, rejuvenated, a happiness that isn't normally there. I mean, just so many emotions that are so wonderful and that cause so many wonderful chemicals in our brain and our body to be released. And the body wants and craves more of that. And the way that we create that for ourselves on an everyday basis is by taking it easy in the terms of hobbies. Like, what lights you up? What brings you joy? Is that coloring? Is it painting? Is it creating something? For some people, it's listening to music. Other people, it might be cooking. And so that's fine, right? What do you love to do? Go and do that. Number two, though, would be also quiet time. That means like actual quiet, like you're not listening to anything. It's not music. Maybe it's nature. Maybe you're outside and you're just listening to the sounds of nature, but you're allowing your brain to not tuning into lyrics or, just the acknowledgement that there is sound happening, but quiet time that might be breathing or meditation. Maybe also time to yourself, right? Like time where you're not with others and you are alone doing what you want, what lights you up, and allowing yourself to feel vibrant and safe and secure in your action of doing what lights you up is so important. And also understanding that there's a difference between relaxing and resting. Like, relaxing is watching TV or listening to music, doing something that's not very active, right? Maybe intentionally sedentary. Whereas resting is sleep, right? So these things are very important. There's another piece that's also recovery. So whether it's people who exercise or maybe recovery from your day, it's with the intention of releasing toxins from the body. Could be through the meditation or breathing, could be through your hobbies. For some people, that's massage, releasing from the body any toxins that have built up. And so taking it easy, it's like how when yoga teachers will say at the end of class that shavasana is the most important part of your practice, not the arm balance or anything else that you did, right? It's shavasana because it's the calming of the body. Taking it easy is one of the most important gifts you could ever give yourself on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think that this is so important in today's like busy world, like where we're so connected all the time. It's like everything is so go, go constantly, it's I feel like it's harder and harder to like take vacation time. Maybe that's just my
Yeah.
life, but it feels like it's
Mhm.
like, getting harder and harder to do that in many, many ways and to actually be disconnected because we don't live in this
Yes.
world where,
Yes.
you have your like work computer. Well, maybe some people do, but I don't. It's like you have your work computer in your workstation, you like leave it behind, somebody else is checking your emails for you. It's hard to disconnect. Like employers
Hmm.
have phone numbers and we're always connected. And I think that
Right.
this idea of actually having, this quiet time, this time to yourself, and this time to actually rest and relax is so important. And I'm totally guilty of this too. Like, so often I'll be like, yeah, I'm relaxing. And I'm like sitting there watching Netflix or scrolling on my phone. Sure, it feels like I'm lying down and decompressing. I'm not working, but it's, my brain's not actually relaxing or resting.
That's right. That's right. And that's a big thing. The brain is a muscle just like anything else, and so it needs the time to rest, needs the time to focus on one thing. We multitask constantly, constantly. And what's happening is this overload, right, of that go, go, go mentality. And that overload also is playing a part in us not being able to sleep or digest things well. And it's just makes life a lot more difficult. And here's the thing, people will say, but Steph, it's very difficult to, do a hobby every single day. And I get that. And so what my suggestion is to people, again, just as with the powering down or with making subtle changes to your food choices and things like that, is start small, right? You can, in the span of a busy day, pause for 30 seconds. And people laugh. They're like, well, what could 30 seconds do? 30 seconds, if you've ever paused and just inhaled intentionally and exhaled intentionally for 30 seconds, that is a game changer. So if before you, in between two Zoom meetings, or if you've returned to work and, you're, going from one meeting over to another building, over to another office, you take a few moments just to connect to yourself. Because what would you have been doing, right? If maybe one of your coworkers or you're waiting for a doctor's appointment, what would you be doing while you're waiting? You'd be on your phone, or you'd be worrying about this thing or thinking through the next thing. Your mind would be going. And while, yeah, it is important to plan or to think ahead and all of that, we actually buy ourselves back time and energy and better productivity when we take that quiet time, when we take that pause to just be quiet, or to doodle, or to say a positive affirmation, or to think great thoughts about somebody, or to look at a picture for a little while, or take a look outside. That does wonders for our success, our productivity, and all the other things that we want to better or feel good in.
Absolutely. I think that that's so important and, so important for us to keep in mind right now in particular during, this is particularly crazy time that we're in the world and this time where things are just so, so busy. So I love this. I think that this is such an important practice and such an important tip.
Oh, good.
Amazing. This conversation's been so good. I feel like I've just loved everything we've talked about. I'm so aligned to everything that you shared. Is there anything else you want to share, Steph, before we wrap up today?
I just hope that this information was received with an open mind and an open heart. And, it's okay if not everything lands with you right now. I think it's important when you're learning about something new is to just, identify one area of your life where, oh, yeah, you know, this might be a pretty cool shift for me to do because it'll get me where I want to go or how I want to feel. And so, just being able to take care of yourself better in one way is so powerful. So I hope that, something resonated and you'll give it a chance because, we can only benefit from living into it, nature, and honoring how we are, and, loving ourselves first and making time for that.
100%. I completely agree with that. And if people want to learn more about you and everything that you offer, where can they go to find that?
So they can go on Instagram, Steff Gallante, or Facebook, Steff Gallante Self Care, or my website, steffgallante.com. So you can reach out to me any way and get connected. And I would love to be connected with you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today and for this amazing conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Matcha Mornings. To find links mentioned in this episode, show notes, photos, and more, head on over to wanderbarn.com/podcast/matcha-mornings. To be the first to know about brand new episodes of Matcha Mornings, subscribe on your podcast app. If you enjoyed this episode of the show, please leave a review or send me an email at wanderbarn@gmail.com with the subject line Matcha Mornings. To follow along with me, Amanda Kingsmith, you can find me on Instagram at Amanda Kingsmith to learn more about other fun projects I'm working on. To find more great podcasts like this one on topics such as travel, the business of yoga, cryptocurrency, and more, head on over to wanderbarn.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon.